There's no better education than making a mistake. It's the lesson you'll never forget. Pivotal in teaching you what you don't want to do. I don't even know where you found that, but right on. I ended up being like a sourcing agent for like Ecuador, Colombia, Northern Peru, pooling all these different things and feeding them into companies that were ending up with products in like Fred Segal and like Nordstrom's and stuff like that.
How did you go from that idea to a full-blown business that's supporting itself?
Really believe in what you're doing. That will carry you through the hard stuff. No matter how much you love something, there are going to be business case and structures that are immovable laws of nature, and you're going to have to deal with them. The only times in my life that I really regret are the times that I was sacrificing so much of the present for like the hope and promise of a future something. The thing is, you never get time back. It was obvious to us, and as soon as we started talking about it with our community, people were like, yeah, we need that. That to me is like the greatest gift of technology.
How important is it to have the right people? How important is it to have the right tribe?
I generally, these days, I hire way more for character than I do for letters after someone's name, schools they graduated from, companies they work for.
On this week's episode of Boundary Breakers, we sit down with deQuieroz. Ian is an unbelievably interesting person with a phenomenal story. He grew up in Africa, moved back to the U.S. at age 8, moved to Ecuador and started a surfboard building company, moved back to the U.S., founded a CBD business that he took all the way through IPO.
Sometimes life gets a little complex. We get out of balance. Through the lack of proper eating, lack of exercise, the stressors in our lives, many different systems in our body may not operate optimally. Well, the endocannabinoid system is definitely one of them. Hemp fusion is special because it is, in its name, fusion of not only hemp, but the fusion of other botanicals.
Most recently, co-founder and CEO of Cindy, which is an online peer-to-peer marketplace for outdoor sporting equipment. I really think you're going to love this episode of Boundary Breakers. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter and Clark. I'd love to hear, start with just a little bit about your background. I think that just so the folks, the audience sort of understands a little bit of your origin story, who you are, and then would love to sort of walk through some of your entrepreneurial experiences, starting, at 8 years old and going through, your surfboard company and all hemp fusion and all that. And then I'd love to spend some time on hemp fusion and how you built that, some, maybe some lessons learned and some thoughts about, that experience from founding it all the way through IPO. Mm-hmm. And then I'd love to spend a good bit of time on Cindy. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about, the platform and what it is and the inspiration behind that. And then we can wrap up, after that. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Yeah. My favorite
Awesome.
Subject. So happy to talk about it.
Beautiful. Well, so yeah. So look, I'm really curious about your background, where you grew up, and how you got a recycling business at 8 years old.
Oh yeah. I don't even know where you found that, but right on. So it is a fact. Yeah. So I mostly grew up in East Africa, in Kenya, and my dad worked for USAID, United States Agency for International Development. So my childhood, I moved around quite a bit, kind of all over the world, but a lot in Africa. And so I think certainly a lot of my formative years were there, and the unique, I guess, like perspective that brings, and being
Absolutely.
A white American living in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya. So I think some of the character components that are kind of beyond business, but I guess translate into business, were probably somewhat developed in that environment. And I think, a lot of business is street smarts. It's being able to read people, to think logically, to follow intuition, to engage and, with people in a super meaningful, profound way is really what kind of gets the job done. In the end, is everyone, feeling a true sense of like camaraderie and connection. And I think growing up in Africa probably played a big role in, I guess, just forming that part of me and that kind of philosophy or way of operating. It's an amazing place. As far as recycling goes, I grew up. So my mom moved to California when I was like around that age 8. We were like fairly strapped for cash, living in an apartment. We had just moved back from Africa. And at that time, recycling was like kind of a new thing, right? It was like EVs are now, where if you're recycling, you're pretty hip. And so there was like not too far away, a couple blocks away, there was a recycling center, and they would buy cans and bottles and all those kinds of things. So how it occurred to me, I'm not really sure, but I ran around our entire neighborhood and apartment complex and everywhere else and left little tags on everyone's door. And I was like, hey, leave all your stuff outside for me on, Thursdays or whatever it was, and I'll come by and grab all of it. And so, it was just this, just very logical thing to me of like, hey, this is so easy. If I take this stuff in my little red wagon and I bring it over to this recycling center, they give me cold hard cash. And so so I just pretty much did that. And back when you're 8 years old, if you make $10, it's a big deal. So I felt like I was rich.
I love it. Yeah. So you had the entrepreneurial bug from a young age, I suppose.
I think I did. Yeah. And I've pretty much just deeper into the background there. So going through like high school, college, I went to school at UC Davis and whatnot, and had, just like everyone, had a bunch of jobs that were very much jobs. Like I worked catering, serving, I worked at a car dealership, I was a lot manager, like, all that stuff that for me is pivotal in teaching you what you don't want to do. Right. And then it really kicks off of like, okay, how do I avoid staying up till 1 a.m. cleaning up dirty dishes from folks who are drunk at a wedding, right? Like, how do I avoid that situation? And so highly motivating to do other things. So when I graduated UC Davis, I still had a big time travel bug. I ended up traveling in South America for quite a bit. And while I was down there, I'd stumbled upon this old American surfboard shaper that he was like a sailor who had ended up down on this beach town in southern Ecuador, and became friends with him. He was making incredible balsa wood boards. And so my first real company, I basically built a shop and a team down in Ecuador. And for almost 6 years, I ran a company called Balsa Tribe, which was some of the first like sustainable production model surfboards. And I started that when I was 21, and then it ran until, about 2008 during the whole first economic meltdown. So that I learned a lot from that. And pretty much ever since, I've mostly just run my own companies, and kind of that's the way my mind works. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I love what you said, having a whole bunch of jobs, to try to figure out what you don't want to do. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. People ask me a lot, how do I find my passion? How do I know what I want to do? The first thing I always say is, look, I struggled with that as well. I think the best thing to do is try a whole bunch of things. And it's not so much as figuring out immediately exactly what you want to do as much as it is understanding all the things that you don't want to do. So I think you're right on there. Well, so the balsa wood surfboard company, it was biodegradable surfboards. Is that right?
Yeah. So we worked with that ended up branching and becoming bigger and bigger over time. But we effectively had a bunch of farms that we would partner with that were fully organic, biodynamic, sustainable balsa wood plantations, which is pretty key because in Ecuador and a lot of the tropics, there's a lot of deforestation that happens when the price of balsa goes up. It's a very quick growing tree. And so, it was very important for us to be working on like sustainable levels where it was part of this multi-cropping strategy that the farmers would have. We would grow that balsa, we'd harvest it, we'd bring it into effectively mills and then kiln dry it. So we'd mill it into all the shapes and sizes of boards we need. Then we would build blanks from balsa, like hollow, like an aircraft wing, and shape them into the actual board. So the whole core was either Spanish cedar, stringers, and balsa. And then we'd use a hemp, and we used different kinds of plant fabrics as a fabric, and then we'd use a plant resin, and so the entire board was actually biodegradable when we were done with it. And we'd make, and they were beautiful, like art pieces.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's really cool. Well, so how did you? What inspired you? You know, you met this gentleman who was an artist, it sounds like, and it was very skilled at what he did. How did you go from, you know, at what point did you realize, look, I may be able to make a business out of this? Or what inspired you to make a business out of this as opposed to just making some surfboards?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I honestly think that, like, it's just how my mind is. Like, every time I see a problem or an opportunity or whatever, it breaks down a, you know, Cliff Note business scenario for it. It's just a strange thing my mind does. And honestly, it's hard to turn off. And even when I'm like fully committed into something, I still see opportunities all around me. And it just like depends on what I'm going to sink a bunch of time into and energy, really.
Right.
But yeah, it was just one of those things. I thought the boards were amazing. I enjoyed surfing them. I had some buddies back in the States, you know, who had seen them and wanted them. And it just kind of like started. And it was a cool project, right? I was extremely into surfing. I got to live on the southern coast of Ecuador on an amazing wave. I had this little, you know, shop I worked out of with guys for the most part that I really liked. And yeah, you know, and in 2008, like, I think I learned a lot of lessons with that too, because by the time it was 2008, I was almost 26. And at that point I had started working with other companies in the United States, primarily, that were more like eco fashion style companies. So like hats, hoodies, fabrics, things. So like the whole eco textile thing was picking up.
Right.
So I ended up being like a sourcing agent for like Ecuador, Colombia, Northern Peru, pooling all these different things and feeding them into companies that were ending up with products in like Fred Segal and like Nordstrom's and stuff like that. But so yeah, and really, like, so I was a very busy guy by the time I was like 26. I had, you know, the boards going, I had all this stuff going from all over the place. I traveled incessantly. And that was fine. And but yeah, really in 2008, it was like everything just stopped. It froze. It was unbelievable. Like I think I had, you know, $120,000 of outstanding, you know, credits, I guess, to like different board shops and all kinds of stuff and everything. Literally everyone stopped paying. It was like crazy. So yeah, that pretty much put me on the ropes with that business. I ended up selling it to a Spanish guy who still runs it to this day under a different brand called Kuntiki, Kuntiki. Still beautiful boards, still same warehouse and everything. But, you know, I think I learned a lot, you know, during that time in 2008. And then honestly, that brought me into, you know, hemp fusion, where then I again learned a lot. So it's, yeah, like there's no better education than making a mistake. It's the lesson you'll never forget. So I've got a few of those.
No, I love it. I love it. And I want to talk about hemp fusion, and maybe you can talk about both the surfboard company and hemp fusion. You know, I think that there's a lot of budding entrepreneurs that, you know, maybe they're right at that point where they're like, hey, this is a beautiful surfboard and I'm passionate about it because it uses sustainable materials. And I love surfing. I really think we could do something here. And I really think that I could make something. You know, any thoughts or you know, lessons learned from how do you go from that idea to a full-blown business that's supporting itself?
Well, yeah, I think in a certain way, like, ignorance is bliss, in the sense that, like, if you don't really know what you're getting into and you just start, it will probably be a lot harder than you think and take a lot longer, and it's going to be wild. And, you know, I think like my entrepreneurial journey started when I was so young in my 20s that you're just honestly foolish. You're just like overly optimistic, and, you know, you're excited about something. You're like, everyone's going to be excited about it. I think tempering that is good, but the problem is most people probably temper that too much, right? And they never get started. And truly, I think in my experience, and what I would only recommend people do is like do what you absolutely passionate about, what you're so stoked to do. And it's super cliche and everyone says that, but very few people do it, including myself, right? And I made a lot of mistakes where, I worked with people that I wasn't thrilled about or on ideas for years that were like, okay, but it wasn't my life's calling.
Right.
And kind of like how you mentioned in the beginning of your show, like for me personally, if you find a community that you really like and you're solving problems or creating something that is, you are passionate about improving those lives or improving that part of the world, and it's that, that classic like missionary versus mercenary, like
Right.
if you really believe in what you're doing, that will carry you through the hard stuff. And it's going to make the fun stuff way more fun because it'll be totally aligned with what you love and what you're all about. So I think going in there with, the right amount of optimism, don't get too pessimistic or you'll never start. And I think the older I've gotten, the more that I've done looking at like the business case fundamentals and really trying to understand how that is going to impact and scale and multiply. And, I've run businesses that are heavily product based, like at Hemp Fusion. In the end, I think we had 180 something products, multiple warehouses, 4 different brands. We had 22,000 stores, everything from like Targets to other brands that were only online. And, so if you have to make a packaging change, it's a 6-month cycle by the time it bleeds through onto a store shelf. It's another 6 months before you have feedback on if that was an improvement or not, or what, or right. So it's like, there are certain components of businesses that you cannot change. And to understand, what is the business model that you're pursuing? What are going to be the implications of that in a year or 2 years? Like, say I'm successful, what is this going to look like? Let me think about the detail of this. And so, part of why I'm a co-founder of Sendy and why I'm so excited about what we're doing is I love working in this tech space. It's like, that with no physical product. It's incredible, the feedback loops, the speed at which we're able to deliver improvements and user feedback suggestions and turn that into features, like, and just all the analytics are in front of you. And so it's like we're shortening this feedback response loop from 6-12 months to 6-12 days, and the compounding benefits of that are like incredible. So I think that is, no matter how much you love something, there are going to be business case and structures that are like immovable laws of nature, and you're going to have to deal with them. So being able to get really clear on what that looks like, I think is a good thing. And honestly, to do stuff like this, I really feel like you have to be a tough person mentally, and that you cannot let stress or pressure interfere with logical thinking. That's when it goes wrong. And like sports for me, like everything that Sendy's about is what I'm about personally. And like, I love surfing, snowboarding, do these things. I find mental clarity there. It helps me manage and deal with stress. It's excellent. And then my attorney, who's also a great friend, he's a partner in Sendy. He's former GC of Starbucks. Just legend. Like, one of his pieces of advice to me is like, the moment someone gets emotional on a phone call, you can discredit everything they say for the rest of the phone call. Right. And it's like,
Amen.
Whoa, okay. He's very cut and dry fellow. And I think when it comes to business, like early founders, you're so dedicated. You're so in it. Your ego's in it. Your everything about who you are is in it. You're so committed, and like, that's okay. That's great. But like, somehow you have to keep emotion out of it. Like, you can be emotional about other things in your life, but not business. Just try and be ultra clear.
So how do you do that? I mean, that's sort of a unfair question, but I mean, that's a very difficult thing to do when you've poured your blood, sweat, and tears, and possibly life savings into this. And, whether it's somebody who says no, thank you, or what have you, how do you keep the emotion out of there and keep pressing on towards logic?
I think that it's a bit of training yourself, but I think a few things. And a lot of this, honestly, I've learned from these extreme sports. Like if you're dropping into some line in, backcountry somewhere, or you're out on a glacier on a snowmobile somewhere, it's like you might be legitimately afraid. Like there are a lot of emotions going on, but somehow, like if you don't think clearly, it's going to make it a lot worse. And so I think I've had a lot of hours of managing the stress hormones or whatever they are to try and navigate the real world, the actual consequence world, not the theoretical consequence world, which is a lot of what business is, But I think a few things that are helpful. One is I pretty much don't pay attention to any of my thoughts at night after I lay down on my pillow, unless they're really positive and good. And I feel like a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, especially myself in many years of my life, I'd wake up at 1 a.m. and be like, oh my God, it's never going to work. And it's falling apart. I'm totally screwed. Right. Like that's, you have, I don't know what it is about the subconscious mind that will kick off in the middle of the night. That is not helpful. Like literally discredit it, wake up in the morning and then think about the exact same thing. Right. And it's going to feel a lot more manageable. That's one component. The other component is the same thing that I said, where if someone else gets emotional on the phone, that you can discredit what they say for the rest of the call. And maybe that's not kosher and I shouldn't say that, but I was told that advice and it works for me.
I think that's great advice.
But you have to apply that to yourself, right? So you're like, oh, if I'm going to come across this call as all emotional, then I'm that guy, right? I'm the one that is now discredited. And so, I think that there's a certain amount of restraint that helps with that. And then what else really helps me manage with that? Definitely sports, definitely staying healthy. I think one thing I could speak to is that the only times in my life that I really regret are the times that I was sacrificing so much of the present for the hope and promise of a future something, a future payout, right? I'm miserable right now. I had a chapter in my life where I was commuting back and forth to Denver, working in this basement office with 60 stressed out employees, and the whole energy was extremely difficult. And I was not happy in that moment in my life. But I was like, it's okay. It's worth it, right? We're going to pull through this phase and we'll get to another phase and this and that. The thing is, you never get time back. And to really, I think, really build a beautiful company, finding ways of doing it sustainably to where you're mostly happy every single day, even though you're building your company for the future and the future promise and the hope. And that's a great thing to have, but you're also happy today. And whether that's you're going to hit the gym or you're going to swim some laps, or you're going to play golf with some friends or go snowboarding or whatever it is, don't lose all that stuff, because it's another one of the classics, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. If you're sprinting, you're going to burn out. And you're going to not think clearly, and then you're going to make a mistake, and it's going to, be really difficult. So I think just keeping that sustainable pace to where you're I love my life now. I really like what I'm doing. It's super challenging. There's a promise of a greater payout, and I'm logical about business.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's beautiful. And it's one of the, I know I struggle with that, the balance of not pouring too much of yourself into one thing, like you said, for the promise of some reward in the future, and then sacrificing everything else that you don't realize that you're missing at the time. No, I think that's amazing. Well, so I want to spend most of our time on Cindy and hearing all about that. But I got to hear, just briefly, I got to hear about Hemp Fusion and how you started that and grew it all the way to IPO. What was your original sort of kernel of thought there for the business?
So when I left Ecuador, and Balsa Tribe basically was sold for the price of its hard assets, pretty much, didn't make a penny on it. I moved back to California where my mom was. I had some roots. It was the middle of the total recession, and I was kind of like, okay, what am I going to do next year? I had kind of a nest egg, not a huge one, but I needed to, do something else. And so moment of truth. And at that point, it was like the very beginning of when like CBD was kind of being talked about. And I was like in, an hour north of San Francisco in the mecca of this stuff. So it was like definitely early days. We were the first to start hearing these anecdotal stories of people having like pretty incredible, healing experiences, et cetera, from this stuff. And through conversation and a bunch of digging, I had a friend of mine who was like one of the leaders in this space at the time, and like really educating myself. I was like, whoa, wait a second. We can get this from hemp, and this can theoretically be sold as a supplement nationwide, right? And nobody at that point was doing that. There was one other company that was like just crossing the line with the first stores. So it's like there was this little proof of concept in tiny markets. And but in my mind, I was like, if this works the way that it's, people say it works, this is a massive national market, and holy smokes. And so, again, with like crazy optimism, I invested a bunch of that cash in a bunch of equipment and literally imported like hemp from China and from like other places and started running it in these machines and seeing if we could isolate CBD from hemp. And,
wow.
Throughout the course of that, I hired a group out of New Jersey that specializes in developing natural products for, kind of whole food style market. And I got them to basically look at all the legal pathways, how this needs to be done to be 100% federally legal. How should we do the formulation so we can like make claims like sleep and stress and, like support the traditional support products like they do in the supplement category. And that basically kicked off Hemp Fusion. The team kind of coalesced from a mix of like that East Coast team and us. And we ended up sourcing all of that hemp from Poland and Eastern Europe for the most part. And over the course of, I guess, maybe 7 years, built it into what it was, which, yeah, 22,000 retailers, were 4 different brands, 180 products, most of them all hemp based. So definitely one of the leaders. And it was also a frothy market. And so when I launched Hemp Fusion, I had no concept of what it was to run a business of that size and raise that kind of capital. And so over the course of the company, I think we raised, close to 60 million and, including an IPO, and we used maybe every different type of mechanism to raise on, from convertible notes and safes to price rounds, private rounds, and IPO rounds and all that stuff. And really my partner and attorney, Scott, was a critical part of really just giving me a PhD level education in how to do this stuff. And so yeah, I learned an incredible amount. There is no doubt about that.
I bet. Yeah. So that was a pretty big risk. You basically took your nest egg and invested it into the equipment and raw materials for a proof of concept, sounds like.
Completely, yeah. So when you're in that far, like when you're that far in, you make it work, right? And that's
right.
Like you could pivot, but you got to make it work,
right? Because you're all in at that point, right?
Yeah.
Well, so, if you could go back and do Hemp Fusion all over again, or if you could go back and rewrite the story of those 6 years, is there anything you would have done differently, or are there things that I wish we never did this or never did that?
Oh boy, there are exactly 1 million of those.
Any that are top of mind that you feel like would be helpful for any others to hear? Because look, there's somebody out there. There's somebody out there right now that just invested their life savings in the equipment and the raw materials of something that they're passionate about, that they believe in, and they're succumbing to the late night subconscious thoughts as well, and
mm-hmm.
they would eat this up. They would really eat this up. So I'm curious, anything that you could share that you would have done differently would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think I can share some stuff that's highly relevant to the current economic environment, because I think that a lot of folks, like I'm one of the youngest people who was actually seriously affected by the 2008 crash. Like I've been able to live through one significant economic recession, and then I built a business through a really kind of bullish market. And and I think in some ways we're kind of like back to square one a bit in that there's a different way to think about business now. And that the growth at all costs mantra is probably being dissected, questioned, examined more closely, because that's not really an option for a lot of people, probably the person you just mentioned. And so the takeaways are, I think, simplicity is beauty. Simplify all your systems as much as you possibly can. The least amount of people involved in every function, the better. And the more those people talk, the better. The other thing is, every time an accountant or a marketing agency or a PR agency or any kind of agency or consultant or anything is doing something, what they do is not magic. It's not that complicated, and you should have your head like pretty much wrapped around the bulk of the services that are being provided to your company. And one of the ways that relates to Sendy versus HempFusion is HempFusion relied very highly on outsourced marketing agencies or hiring expensive, C-level employees that would, promise to whatever, right? Change the whole this and that about whatever they're working on. And like, I don't really buy into that stuff anymore. I like doing everything in-house. I like doing it with a highly scrappy team. I like folks to be diversified in what they tackle. And the biggest places to save money, I personally think, are focusing on online markets. So even if you have a product, we at Sendy, we have a digital product, so it's different. But if you have a physical product, going into a traditional retail environment is long, difficult slog. And there are all kinds of layers of margins that will get you down to a very small margin, but you have to hold all this inventory on your books, and you have to move it and carry 30-day terms or whatever for different folks. And so what happens is, even if you're growing very quickly, you get into a position where you need to be constantly raising capital ahead of your growth to be holding this growth. Plus you need the sales and marketing infrastructure to support the products to make sure they actually move off the shelves. It gets very complicated. So I think for, smaller companies, finding an online niche that you can speak to, like knowing your consumer perfectly, where they shop, where they traffic, where they are. So if I look at like the market for Sendy, for example, I can, go on a website, see that REI, for example, has 35 million monthly users on their website. I'm like, okay, that traffic is very parallel to the traffic that I want. How do I capture that traffic, right? Whether it's through blogs or reviews or athletes posting on social media, or like, I need to find the channels that the people who are interested in what I'm offering, that I'm really solving a problem for them. I just need to tell them about it. I need to find those people and then keep those systems really tight. Understand, if you're going to use like Google Shopping and ads through that, or Meta or Instagram ads or whatever, take the time and understand it. You can YouTube it, you could take a course. There's within a few hours you can understand the fundamentals, so that when you're talking to service providers, you really understand what their job is, how the mechanisms work, and then save as much as you can. And so like these days, Sendy is kind of a passion project for me, not only in the sports and the marketing that we do, but also in the business model itself. Like, I like to do as much maximum impact for the most lean, team and strategy possible. And so like, that's what we focus on, is like, how do we spend the absolute least with the least amount of people to accomplish the most? And I think we're now in a climate where that needs to be the focus, instead of growth at all costs as a focus.
Gotcha. But that makes sense. So let's get into Sendy. So you got the IPO, you end up transitioning out of hemp fusion, and look, I mean, you're young, have already been massively successful. I mean, to take a company from nothing to, 20,000 stores, over 60 million raised, and an IPO isn't an easy thing, to put it very lightly. What made you decide that you wanted to take on another big project like this? How did this come up with Cindy?
Yeah. So at the time we first started talking about Cindy, I was still working with Hemp Fusion. I had transitioned from CEO to oversee all of our digital marketing across all brands and all that. So I definitely was like getting a major crash course in like the most cutting edge digital marketing, right? Like how do you really move numbers online? And so that was interesting to me. I was in Kauai actually with Travis. We were surfing. We started like talking about it as a concept, kind of like one of those like, how has no one ever done this before moments, right? Where like as soon as we started talking about a dedicated marketplace, buy, sell, or rent for all the sports that we love, it just started flowing. And it was like, one person, oh, we should do this. Oh, you can add that. What if we did this, right? And it was like, I don't even know. It was just coming to us like really fast to the point where both of our girlfriends at the time were just like, dude, shut up, you guys. Like we're out here on vacation and we're just talking about this idea, nerding out hard. And so after that trip, I started exploring. I had never built an app. I built websites and whatnot, but I'd never done something at this level of complexity. And so I started researching just in my free time, kind of like, how would we go about doing this? And started putting the pieces together. Go ahead.
Well, this is fantastic. I don't want to interrupt you, but so just to make sure the audience is on board. So tell the audience the fundamental idea behind Cindy.
Yeah.
In your words.
So super simple. Cindy, it's an online platform. It's buy, sell, or rent adventure sports equipment anywhere in North America. So website is sendy.io. We also have apps on the Apple App Store and Android. It's beautiful on the app. We launched a brand new website 2 days ago. I like it. We'd love feedback. So if anyone jumps on there, please just write to us and let us know. But yeah, it was basically us being participants in these sports, having endless amounts of gear for 100 different sports sometimes between all of us friend group. And there's no dedicated marketplace to redistribute any of that. And so it's like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, local area only, all kinds of scams, tons of hassles, barely worth it to sell anything like under $200 because you're going to get stood up in like a Safeway parking lot. And so, yeah, it was just one of those things that it was obvious to us. And as soon as we started talking about it with our community, people were like, yeah, we need that. And there's such an important shift towards the like re-commerce and like more intelligently distributing what we already have on Earth. There's already so much equipment. There are so many snowboards. This stuff is just sitting in people's garages and closets or the back of shops. And there are people who could literally change their life if they had this item. And so, yeah, just dropping the whole price point of what people need to get into these sports because it's life-changing once you are committed to sports like these. So we're passionate about that. And that's how we started building. And then the rental component, it's very like fractured. Like when we're traveling and we try and rent a mountain bike, I have to like Google it and then call the shops and then see if there's something on like a Saturday and not really sure what bike I'm going to get. I have to ask them. So it just was like, and then for shops, it's weird because they're just always getting calls and some of them are literally taking notes on paper like it's 1990. And so we were like, I think we'd already built so much of this infrastructure into Sendy and adding the rental thing wasn't that crazy complicated. And so we ended up building the whole rental side. I know my developers are going to kill me that I said it wasn't crazy complicated, but anyway, it was close enough that we could pull it off. And so we built like a full Airbnb style functionality into the rental side for sports equipment. And then we have like like an Amazon-style.com interface, super clean, fast shipping, peer-to-peer for buy-seller rent, all the core adventure sports, climbing, surfboards, skiing, snowboarding, foiling, kiting, snowmobiling, like you name it. So that's our community. And we've been growing, ever since we launched day one, we started doing transactions. We've been growing every day since. 85% of our traffic is organic. It's just people who are sharing it on social media, telling each other about it. So yeah, we have an amazing community, and I think we're able to actually solve a problem. And like, that's what it feels like when you do the thing, when you really create something that works and people love, it starts spreading. And,
Right.
So yeah, like that's what Sendy is, and it's kind of the most fun thing I've ever done for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really, it's interesting. I mean, obviously it fits with the other entrepreneurial ventures that you've done, since you were 8, right? And going back to to recycling and to the surfboards and the hemp, it's clearly it's right in your lane. And what's interesting to me is it sort of weaves in several of the topics that we've been talking about all along in terms of building a community and talking to and creating value for a specific, group or I mean, community is the easiest way to say it, right? But I imagine that you guys target, the adventure sports group, and that you want to get everybody that is involved in adventure sports so that becomes their sole marketplace, whether they're traveling and looking to rent something or whether they want to get a new mountain bike and want to sell their existing one to a peer and then maybe find another one from a peer. What's also interesting to me is it's sort of, I think that there's a little bit of an awakening in our economy with regard to these idle assets, I mean, I think Uber was the first to obviously tap into it. You've got all these idle vehicles out there, and how do you harness all of those different assets with regards to transportation? They've opened a lot of eyes. But walk me through. I mean, as somebody maybe that isn't in the adventure sports community, these are high dollar items, high dollar equipment that may often, like you said, sit in the closet for half the year. So somebody could potentially make some money by renting it out, or if they're looking to trade it in. So walk me through sort of, how the community sort of interacts with Sendy.
Yeah. So for the most part, since launch, we've been live for almost exactly 1 year and a week. And we've been focusing primarily on the buy-sell component. So that is it's actually internationally now with Canada, integrated marketplace where that is like at this point really tailored to the peer-to-peer community. So individuals who have, split boards, skis, mountain bike shocks, parts, weird things that people, may not have another outlet for. It's basically all these users are pooling all this equipment into this searchable, highly categorized marketplace to where other folks all around North America can search, find, and make offers or purchase those items. And then it ships via UPS anywhere in the country. Cash is held in escrow with Sendy. It's released after the item arrives and it's approved. And so, yeah, that's pretty much like, how that works, and at the fundamental level, how people engage with it. And, for us, like I said, REI, for example, does 3.8 billion in revenue per year, one retailer, right? And that happens year after year after year. And there's no dedicated marketplace for these types of items. So these are everything from $800, $600 skis, $5,000 mountain bikes, $600 Gore-Tex jackets, right? It's crazy kind of the amount people spend on these types of passions. So we have a marketplace that right now it's working the way that like a Poshmark or a Real would. The thing is that when they're selling clothing, their average order value is $30. I think it's literally that. And, ours is like $210 because it's really, that's the market that we're in. And so, yeah, the way that we see it is there are just billions of dollars a year just in North America, not to mention the world, sold into this market that are literally piling up in people's garages and closets. Meanwhile, there are people still buying new stuff. My dad is a hardcore environmentalist. I grew up, fully turning off the lights, turning off the water when I brush my teeth, that level of attention. And, ultimately we can keep creating more eco items, but the only way we're going to make a significant impact in our environmental impact as a species is by reducing the amount of stuff that we're producing. That to me is the greatest gift personally, I think, besides the world's knowledge in your pocket. But that to me is the greatest gift of technology, is the efficiencies that we're finding within what already exists. And so, yeah, I believe strongly in that. It's an incredible tool to be able to create, and we apply it to a community that we literally love and that we're a part of. So it's just a very cool, very cool combination of things that make it very exciting and very fun, to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so tell me really quickly about this team that you guys had in Ukraine that was able to pull off the engineering and development of your app despite all of the heartbreaking craziness that's going on over there.
Yeah, so still have them, still work with them every single day. So they
That's awesome.
We're now more than 2 years working together as partners, as every day on Zoom, working on all kinds of different components. And so, yeah, we have a team of 6 basically in Ukraine. They are pretty much responsible for building every single thing that someone sees on the Sendy platform. So regardless of which app you download, or Sendy.io, mobile, desktop, all the different optimizations done, we built all of that in Ukraine, and we basically built all of it during the war. And so when I was looking at okay, how are we going to build this product? What's it going to take? Like I said, I'd built websites, fairly complicated custom websites before, but nowhere near what we're doing now. And so I started interviewing different teams, and more so individuals of those teams. I was looking for the perfect project manager / product manager, right? Someone that I could really clearly communicate a vision to, and they could navigate and manage the dev team to create. And that communication with that person was paramount to me. So I probably, interviewed, I think, about 30 different people and firms looking for the right software team. Because at this point, we all put our own cash into this thing to kick it off and build an MVP. And it's kind of an all or nothing. If you get that decision wrong and you end up with a product that doesn't work after putting that cash in, game over, right? You're that's not encouraging to anyone else to invest in you or you to invest in yourself. So yeah, that was a critical decision. And we started working with that team right before the war started. So at this point, we had no idea that was on the horizon. We were just getting ready to build a software project. And a couple months into it, war starts. It goes absolutely haywire. At this point, I knew these guys, but not incredibly well. Working together for 2 or 3 months, and already liked them, but didn't know them that well. And it was pretty much through that initial month of the war that I really realized the character of the people that I was working with and who are on this team. And they are unbelievable. Like Vlad, who's my main guy over there, he's literally WhatsApping me in traffic, leaving Kyiv on the first night with incoming cruise missiles, texting me hey, we're going to be a day late, with this version update or something. I'm just Vlad, dude, do not worry about it. Get out of there and, keep me posted. So we went through a pretty wild time where we were trying to get some of them out of the country, but because they were men, they weren't allowed to leave. And then we had to set up, offices, a place to work basically in Western Ukraine, away from, Kyiv, and where a lot of Like the fighting came right to the outskirts of Kiev. Like I saw it with my own eyes when I was there, and I was like, whoa, that was a close call. But so they were in Western Ukraine working, and for 7 months we kept hammering on this project, and through all kinds of you're inevitably invested and interested in their personal lives because you're on Zoom with them every day, and you can see the backgrounds changing, and that you hear the news, and you're just like, what is this guy dealing with while he's building this app? This is crazy. So anyway, we get down to November of last year, and we had, just for fun, Travis and I like numerology and stuff, we launched Sendy on 11/11/22. So that awesome. That was our goal. Yeah, we had this MVP, which is pretty good, but still crappy. But we were like, all right, we're launching this thing. So right then, Russia starts bombing all the power stations. So all of a sudden, we're like Zooming with these guys, and they're in parkas in the dark, like on their phone, like Zooming, and we're about to launch this app. And this is our whole back end team, right? If the thing crashes or someone has a bug, this is who we call. So, oh man. So I booked last minute travel out there, we brought a generator, a couple battery packs, a Starlink, all this stuff. So I literally loaded that stuff up, flew over to Poland, took a bus into Ukraine, met up with Vlad, drove to Kyiv, spent a week with the team, and literally launched that app to the day on schedule. It was insane.
Wow. So you went there personally while the war was raging.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I spent almost a week in Kyiv in the middle of all the crap. Yep.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was pretty wild.
And then they were using. No kidding. That's unbelievable dedication, both on your behalf and theirs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they were using the Starlink internet to be able to get everything uploaded and built, communicated.
Yeah, at that point, so all of our stuff's in GitHub, just like most people are. So it's diversified servers across North America primarily, and so really the vast majority was built. And at that point, we needed to keep them engaged for all the bug fixing and the one-up, because you build a product like this, you try and think of every single thing someone's going to do, and you rack your brain on it for 6 months, and then you launch it, and you actually have no idea what people are going to do. Because then all of a sudden there's 2,000 people on it, and they're all chatting and talking and liking and trying to share stuff and buy stuff and post stuff. That's when you find out, like, oh, okay, we're missing this, we're missing that, this button needs to change. It's an incredible amount of information that comes in that you have to process and respond to. So at that point, that's mostly what it was, is us staying in super tight communication to make sure that we were improving and that the app was a fluid and great experience for everybody. And then, I'd say that chapter lasted for probably 2 months, and then they started getting most of the power supplies back on and things went back to normal. But these guys were, in cold, dark apartments in the middle of the winter, building Sendy on a Starlink and a generator that was sitting on their porch of their Soviet high-rise, in Kyiv. It was no joke.
That is a hell of a story. That is a hell of a story. Well, so there's two things that I want to dig into about Sendy, and I guess the first is, we'll stay on topic here. Whether it's Sendy or Hemp Fusion or back when you were in Ecuador, we've talked a lot about thoughts about business model, how to approach it, how to think about being an entrepreneur personally. We haven't talked a whole lot about the leadership aspect of this in terms of finding good people to get on your team that share the same types of values and work ethic and things that you do. Has that been a challenge for you throughout your career? How do you find like-minded people to help you build your passion?
It's a super great question. Gosh.
And look, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but
no, I like it. It's a great question.
I think you answered a lot of it with regard to how you found the folks in Ukraine. right? I mean, you obviously did your homework, but you didn't necessarily. You can't know until you've worked with somebody for a long time, and it turns out that it sounds like these guys were the ultimate winners. I'm sure that you have, as I have also found the opposite experience. But
yeah,
how do you find them?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best questions you could probably ask in business. Honestly, I don't know if there's a silver bullet there, but things that I've learned, I guess, and I've had a lot of both. I've had rock stars and I've had total like frauds, to be honest with you. I think that, yeah, for me, I think that trusting your gut instinct and your read on someone, not making compromises on character because you think that there's some overarching benefit that's going to happen even though there's a flaw in character. So like making an exception for character because there's a promise of some other delivery or opportunity. I think that, and this, maybe I'm wrong, and I prefer to run small to medium sized teams that are like very interconnected, highly efficient, and highly communicative. That's my favorite stage of business. And I think the longer that you can keep it that way and the more you can accomplish in that small of a unit, the better, so that you're really only transitioning to that, above 20 plus employees when you're really going into growth mode and the core team is highly established. They know each other, they love each other, they've been through some crap together, and then you can start expanding under, for the most part, that. I generally, these days, I hire way more for character than I do for letters after someone's name, schools they graduated from, companies they work for. That stuff doesn't matter to me as much because almost everything aside from like hardcore engineering and whatnot can be learned. And the majority of talent or positions in a company are not those hardcore science-based positions. A lot of them, whether it's sales, marketing, customer service, warehouse managing, like whatever that stuff is, like to me, the character and the essence of the company is far more important than like anyone's specific background. And generally when, people come in from a big company or a great school or whatever, that does not necessarily translate to the on the ground reality of what you're dealing with. And the specifics of what you're dealing with, the efficient way to deal with them lies in thinking incredibly logically and knowing your community and your product incredibly well. And so, for instance, like Sendy Sam, who runs all of our customer service over at Sendy, he's a friend of mine from 20 years, or something like that. Like I grew up surfing together with him on the coast of California. And I know him, I trust him, I like him. He's great to work with. He's super honest. He's incredibly friendly. He remembers everybody's name. It doesn't matter if you met him 2 years ago for like 2 minutes at a bike festival where he met 300 other people. Somehow he remembers everyone's name. So you can't go to school for that, right? It's just these innate characters that make him amazing at customer service, or characteristics that make him amazing at customer service because it's naturally who he is, right? And so like someone like that, I brought him in and he learns all the system. He learns the back end of Sendy of where all the chats and incoming ticket requests and, so we can teach him that software component. And ideally all of your software that you're building is user-friendly enough that you can basically grab someone off the street and be like, hey, this is how it works in 2 days. Otherwise it's like you got another problem.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so
that's a really good point.
Hire for character. I personally think be basically uncompromising about it. I think the like pump and dump mentality of like, oh, we're going to blow this thing up in 3 years and then we're going to sell it and stuff like that. That's an easy way to create a toxic culture. And I think we should combine some of like the lessons of like literally like the early 1900s and 1800s, where when someone set out to build a company, it was like, I'm going to build Standard Oil, or I'm going to build Walmart, or like right? These are people that venture capital wasn't a thing. They're trying to build an enduring company for their family for 100 years, for multiple generations. And I think we need to go somewhere in between that and the like VC culture of like a 4-year exit of like, it's, if we're going to make a meaningful change in the world and create something that's incredible, it will take a dedicated effort over a significant period of time. And so picking your team, your tribe, your crew, you know, that you're going to do that with is essential. And think about it as if you're going to work with that person for the rest of your life, not like, oh, I have to deal with this person for 3 years and then I'll get rich. Don't think of it like that.
I love that. I love that. So would you, I mean, I'll ask this in a non-leading way. Regardless of how good your business idea or how good your, your business plan is, how important is it to have the right people? How important is it to have the right tribe?
It's everything, because you literally will not accomplish it by yourself. Like, it's like, honestly, maybe this is weird, but sometimes we use like analogies from the war in Ukraine when we're building this company, because it's been so
sure,
front and center.
Mind, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so like we see ourselves as like a little special forces team or a little SWAT team, and we call ourselves a Sendy SWAT team. And it is paramount. You have to trust, especially when you're at that small, mid-size level, but I would almost say forever, but really small, mid-size. Every member of that team has to pull their weight. You have to be able to depend on them, count on them, trust them, right? And you're like moving across this battlefield with all kinds of tripwires and problems and, unpredictable events, running out of funding and ammunition and all this stuff. And somehow you have to make it through that crazy thing and come out on the end. And so for me to have the relationship that I have with Vlad on the software side, and I have so much respect for that team, and they operate completely differently than Americans. And I'll give you an example. Like when I'm usually running a company or, a team with Americans on it, we'll have lots of meetings. People will talk a lot. Like if someone has an idea, they'll talk a lot around the idea before they talk to the idea, right? And then there has to be some level of consensus before we all start working on it, and then some consensus on the finished product. And so that whole thing, it's great. It's very democratic, and it's also slow. Like if I write a request to the team in Ukraine and I'm like, hey, Vlad, we need to do this, 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 and this. His response to me will be like 3 words. It will be done. That's it, right? Like, holy smokes. So you start compounding that week after week, month after month, where every person involved in this thing has that same attitude. It will be done. It will be done. It will be done, right? A year later, all of a sudden, you've built something pretty incredible and with a very small team, just because it's very efficient.
Through a war.
Through a war, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
That's hard for me to imagine, frankly.
Same.
That type of dedication and certainty, despite probably the most uncertain, environment that any of us could ever imagine, is pretty admirable.
It's incredible, yeah. I think in part it helps take their minds off of everything going on around them, right? Just having this thing to really lean into and occupy your mind. I think it's really been actually positive and healthy, not to mention having income. Forbes magazine, they wrote a great article about that team in Ukraine, because they heard our story and they interviewed everyone on the team and myself and took photos from from my trip over there. And they did a beautiful story, because it is, an incredible feat for a human being to achieve what they achieved.
Absolutely. Well, I hope more people, I saw the Forbes article and read it. I thought it was excellent. I hope more people hear about it, maybe, and become interested in celebrating their accomplishment, maybe through this podcast, because it needs celebrating. I wanted to make sure to ask you about that. And look, I could not agree more with your answer and your response to the important, how critical having the right team is. I think it's easy especially for young entrepreneurs, to to think about bringing somebody in as sort of like a tool or a means to an end, maybe sometimes almost in a temporary fashion to get what they want or to advance their business, as opposed to examining and trying to start the beginning of a partnership, right? That is a mutually beneficial relationship that's going to be valuable, to both the business and all the individuals in the long run. But that's enough. This isn't about me. This is about you. So I'm trying to echo what your answer, which I thought was fantastic, and with regard to the importance of team. So we're running a little bit over here, and I apologize.
Oh, that's fine.
Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure.
Genuinely thank you for your time. I want to ask a little bit about, all right, you've got, how many years did you guys work before, like leading up to 11/11/22 on Cindy?
So we fully built from concept, brand design, UX, user experience, user interface, everything. We completely did all of that all the way to launch in 10 months, which I think is probably some kind of record.
Got it. It's got to be. I mean, I just made the assumption that it was well over a year. That's incredible. Well, so, but, and I'm thinking about this from the perspective of somebody that's thinking, I've got this app idea that I think would be phenomenal, or that I think I could build a great business on. And I think that there's a from a lot of the general public, there's this question about, all right, well, you build an app and it's the world's greatest app, but what do you do? How do you reach your audience? I mean, do you just start with 2 people, one person that wants to buy and the next person wants to sell, and then you go to 3 people, and then you hope to get 200? I mean, how do you build the community to use what you've built?
That is an awesome question. And yeah, so I think that probably 10 years ago, even 8 years ago, if someone were to found a company like Sendy, they would want to be coming from a technical background, technology background. It's a very complicated product. There are a lot of different pieces talking to each other to make sure that this whole financial experience for thousands of people is working perfectly every time, right? No, not easy. So I think that, 8 to 10 years ago, that would have been what you would have needed. I think now the marketing is the bottleneck, and that I come from like a, business administrative background, but I also come very heavily from a marketing background. And I truly think that, and most of our core team is marketing focused. And so I think that now, like, someone with a deep knowledge of digital marketing has as much power and ability to launch something like this as someone with a technical background. And precisely because there are hundreds of thousands or millions of apps that are sitting in the App Store that are not used and loved and improved upon. And so it is very, it's much more common to have a technical founder build an app that goes in the App Store and dies, right? And that is unfortunately very common. And the difference, one of the main differences from that happening versus having an Airbnb viral growth product is, how are you bringing that into the world? And that is like the perfect question. And so, one of the things I think that enabled us to do what we've done so efficiently is, while we were building the app, we were building the entire launch strategy. And so all of our digital marketing assets, collateral, like Sendy only does video. We do 100% video communications with our advertising and consumers. So building all that video banks. I used like publicly available information to write some programs that scrape 1.2 million contacts that are specific to the sports that we're targeting. And then we targeted those audiences with our digital marketing, email outreach, all kinds of other stuff. But all of those things I started doing before we even launched the product, so that when we launched, it was happening in tandem. Otherwise, we would have been another year delayed. And we launched all of that at the same time. So, from a marketing perspective, like, a lot of it is trial and error and finding out what moves the needle. And then you lean into what moves the needle as hard as you possibly can. And there is paid advertising, which is really understanding like, customer acquisition cost and your conversion rates. And generally those things are going to get a lot better over time. So when you launch your product, you're starting with the crappiest product. It's the worst converting product that you're ever going to have. And hopefully every week after that, it gets better, right? So if someone lands on your homepage, how likely are they to become a user and a purchaser and then a repeat purchaser, right? And that's going to impact directly the cost that you can pay to acquire that customer. So you're starting off with a product that's not good at doing that, and you're going to try and make it much, much better at doing that over time. At the same time, the algorithms in Google Shopping and Google Ads and Meta are going to get better and better and better as they learn who is clicking on your ad and what are you doing to engage your audience. And so we skipped a lot of that learning because we told Google and Meta, this is who our audience is. And then we started from like already an incredible baseline. And that's why our digital marketing numbers were so good. Now, like right now we're 4-to-1 on customer acquisition on the first transaction. So we make $4 for every $1 we spend on the very first transaction. And then that customer sticks with us for we don't know how long, a very long time. So if you can get numbers like that, you're like, wow, this is very, scalable. Like I can spend into this like crazy and I'm not losing money. It's the opposite of having like, oh, hey, like for instance, at Sendy, we spend $1, we make $4. At Hemp Fusion, and our customer acquisition cost is somewhere like around $12 to $20, depending on the day. At Hemp Fusion, I had a $60 customer acquisition cost. I'd have to have 3 months of that customer purchasing the product to pay for the acquisition of that customer. And I had an average customer staying with us for like 4 months. So it's a pretty narrow window to make sure that you're not just burning a hole, in the bank account. So that's like the paid side in the quickest way possible. The stuff that I love is the organic stuff. It's the athletes sharing. It's other people in the community sharing. It's building in viral features to the app that once you kickstart the machine or start rolling the ball, it starts running on its own volition. And so like that, those are the key elements that have helped Sendy build, because right now we're growing 100% month over month in traffic, and 85 to 90% of that traffic is organic. So that is like, ideal. And that is when you're really thinking about how do people use my product? How do they interface it? How do they share it to their friends? How do I build in these components that are viral? And that what we found is like, we have an incredible athlete program with a whole bunch of athletes that have been joining like every single week. And that's driving so much growth. But we're actually giving the ability for those athletes to earn options in Sendy. So they become shareholders with us. They own our company with us. So we're creating a community-owned company by the professional athletes that drive the sports, right? It's fantastic. Wow. And then those athletes, by posting and selling and sharing their gear to social media from Sendy, they're announcing to their audiences, about Sendy, then their audiences come on and they do the same thing. And then they post and share to their friends, and they post and share to their friends. So it's just like, if you, and there are plenty of great books about this. And if you can build a product that contains these viral components, it will save you an unbelievable amount of heavy lifting and an incredible amount of capital, which is directly dilutive, especially in the early stages.
Yeah. That's really cool. So you're sort of, you're inviting the athletes to become part of the community, but you're also sort of deputizing them to be your sales force in a way, right? Because they are. That's not the right way. That's not the right way to put it. Mm-hmm. In exchange for becoming part of the community, they're exposing Sendy to their community. So I think that's really I think that's really unique, really interesting. And so Travis Rice and Cameron Zink are your partners, or the guys that co-founded this with you. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly
those are,
right.
adventure sports legends. which is also really cool. Well, so before we wrap up, so I guess tell me tell the audience who's the ideal user for Cindy. Is it anybody that is whether it's skateboarding, surfing, mountain biking, snowmobiling, anybody that does outdoor sports needs to go to Cindy. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean it's incredible like how quickly it's building. But yeah, snowboarding is really strong for us. Skiing is really strong. Mountain biking is coming in pretty well. We're about to launch like wind sports and water sports, so that's coming up. We just built a full snowmobiling category. A bunch of great pros are jumping on board with us to launch snowmobiling. So yeah, if you just check out sendy.io, it's worth it. We put a lot of time into it, and it's very self-explanatory. You're just going to see, thousands of items available from all over the country for all these different sports. Yeah, it's a great tool. Like we're really proud of it.
As you should be. Is it fair to say before going to REI, you need to check out Cindy first? Does that capture it?
That is our hope, right? Like our hope is that once we gather this unbelievable amount of gear in North America, that they're like on this one platform, there's no reason why you wouldn't check that first. Like even right now, we've only been live for a year, and even right now, you can find a board that in REI is $800. You can find it's been used twice and it's on Sendy for $500, right? And there are thousands of examples of that. And so in our vision, one day Sendy will be a place that someone can go and see if they're looking for a Libtech T-Rice Orca snowboard. They can go to Sendy and see every version, every year, every quality, from everything from new to super used of every board of that model that's available in North America and be able to purchase it. So I think that once we can accomplish that for basically every piece of gear, there's not like a ton of reason to shop other places unless you for sure want some brand new something super custom with a warranty or like whatever it might be, right? But I think that it's a good enough tool.
Yeah.
Like I use it. Right? Like I could go buy a brand new something and pay double for it. I could, but I don't. Like I literally go on Sendy and almost all my kit is from Sendy, and I do it because it's easy. It's the fastest checkout flow. It's literally as fast as Amazon. So it's like once you find something you like, it's done.
Awesome. Well, look, I hope we are able to drive some traffic for you. And like I said, Ian, I can't thank you enough for your time and for sharing all this. Look, I've got one question before we wrap up that I asked to all of my guests.
Okay.
And some people think it's a little bit strange, and look, God forbid anything like this were to ever happen, but it's really insightful with regard to what people care about. But God forbid, there was some type of catastrophe or fire or something that was threatening your office or your house. And you had a minute or two where they let you could run back in and you could grab one thing from your house before it was destroyed. What do you grab?
I grab this.
I love it.
This is a little silver Tuareg cross that my dad gave me when I was probably about 8. And the Tuareg tribe in like Mali used to use these for navigating in the desert to find the stars. And there's a tradition of fathers giving it to their sons. And this particular one is almost 900 years old. And he got it for me in Mali and gave it to me when I was a kid. So for dozens of generations, it's been passed from father to son. And, I've had it since I was 8. And it's usually like, with me if I'm traveling or in my car or something. And so that's probably what I would grab, and it's just sentimental to me, I suppose. Obviously, my dog first.
Well, look, sure, but you just gave me goosebumps. That's one of the coolest answers that I've ever gotten to that. 900 years old. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
pretty cool. Well, Ian, look, thanks again so much. I really appreciate it, man, and I hope to get this out there and get some folks over to your platform. And I think you've helped inspire some folks today for sure.
Well, thanks, Brandon. Yeah, it's great talking to you. So appreciate the
Likewise.
opportunity.
And well, by the way, you've gained at least one new Cindy customer. I'm downloading it as soon as we get off.
That's
Dead
how
serious.
it is. It's brick by brick.
I've got 5 kids, and the oldest is 11, and they're into everything. And so it's going to be I'm checking there first before we get anything, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, it's such a great platform for families. And see, that's 5 new customers. So appreciate it, Brandon.
Well, yeah. One credit card though.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, look, happy Thanksgiving.
Have a great evening. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You too. Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.